Chapter 7. A Man's Work. Maurice Chavez. Chapter 7. A Man's Work Ethic. For even when we were with you, we would give you this command: if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, ESV. It wasn't a moment I ever anticipated, but I'll never forget the way her words cut through me that evening. "I don't feel safe," my wife said, her voice trembling. Not with fear, but with frustration and disappointment. Those 4 words hit me harder than I could have imagined, and I didn't fully understand their weight until much later. We were sitting at our small kitchen table, the remnants of dinner still between us, though neither of us had much of an appetite. Our daughter was in bed, the house was quiet, but the atmosphere was anything but calm. My wife, the woman who had always been my greatest supporter, my anchor, was looking at me with a mix of love, concern, and a hint of desperation. It wasn't an angry confrontation, it was something deeper, more piercing. It was the kind of conversation that reveals just how far you've strayed from who you're meant to be. At that stage of my life, I had lost multiple jobs in a short period. I take full responsibility. It was my own actions that led to my dismissal. I often approached my work with a lack of enthusiasm, and at times my performance fell short of excellence. If I'm being honest, much of it stemmed from a lack of motivation and commitment. I wasn't putting in my best effort. I had become complacent, making excuses and convincing myself that things would eventually fall into place. But the truth was, I wasn't actively doing anything to make that happen. My wife had been patient. She had supported me through every job loss, offering words of encouragement, praying for me, and reminding me that God had a plan. But this time was different. This time, she had reached her breaking point. "I don't feel safe," she repeated, her voice steady but soft. "It's not about physical safety. It's about stability. I don't feel like we're building something secure for our family. I feel like I'm carrying all of the weight, and I'm exhausted." Her words stung because I knew they were true. She was working tirelessly to keep things afloat while I wallowed in self-pity and apathy. Instead of looking for a job or finding ways to contribute, I had withdrawn into myself, spending hours scrolling through social media or watching TV. I had convinced myself that I deserved a break after everything I had been through, but in reality, I was avoiding responsibility. The breaking point. As she spoke, memories of the past few months flashed through my mind. I remembered the look of disappointment on her face when another job fell through, the nights when she stayed up late balancing the budget, and the way her once optimistic demeanor had started to dim under the weight of it all. "I can't do this alone," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're my husband, and I need to know that you're in this with me. I need to know that you're willing to fight for us, to fight for our family." Her words weren't just an indictment, they were a plea. She wasn't trying to tear me down, she was trying to wake me up. And she did. A moment of reflection. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, replaying our conversation in my mind. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to truly face the reality of my situation. I had let my wife down. I had let my kids down. I had let myself down. I opened my Bible, something I hadn't done in far too long, and found myself in Proverbs. One verse in particular seemed to leap off the page. "Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor." Proverbs 12:24. The words hit me like a hammer. Laziness. That was exactly what I had been. I had been lazy, not just in my work, but in my attitude, my responsibilities, and my role as a husband and father. I had been taking the easy way out, avoiding the hard work of rebuilding, and in doing so, I had placed an enormous burden on my wife. But the verse also offered hope. It reminded me that diligence could change my circumstances. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. I spent hours in prayer that night, asking God for forgiveness, for direction, and for the strength to do what needed to be done. I didn't just pray for a new job. I prayed for a new heart, one that would reflect his character and his work ethic. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, determined to start fresh. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and started making a plan. I listed every practical step I could take to turn things around, updating my resume, applying for jobs, networking with old colleagues, and even considering new fields of work. But more importantly, I made a commitment to God and to my wife. I promised that I would give my best effort every day, not just to find work, but to be the man God had called me to be, a provider, a leader, and a servant. When my wife came downstairs, she looked surprised to see me up so early. I told her about my plan and, more importantly, about the conviction I had felt the night before. I apologized for how I had let her down, for the weight I had placed on her shoulders, and for the ways I had neglected my responsibilities. She didn't say much at first, but her eyes softened, and I could see a glimmer of hope returning. She didn't need me to be perfect. She needed me to try. The road to redemption. It wasn't an overnight transformation. There were still days when I felt discouraged, when rejection emails came flooding in, or when I questioned whether I would ever find meaningful work again. But I kept going, motivated by the knowledge that my efforts weren't just about providing for my family, they were about honoring God. Colossians 3:23-24 became my guiding principle. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. That verse reminded me that my work, whether it was a temporary job, a side gig, or a full-time career, was ultimately for God. It wasn't about impressing others or proving myself. It was about serving Him with diligence and integrity. Over time, my efforts paid off. I found a new job, one that challenged me and gave me a sense of purpose. But more importantly, I found a renewed sense of identity and responsibility. I realized that my work ethic wasn't just about what I did, it was about who I was, a changed perspective. Looking back on that season of my life, I'm grateful for my wife's honesty. Her confrontation, though painful, was exactly what I needed to snap out of my complacency. She reminded me of the kind of man I wanted to be, the kind of man God had called me to be. Work isn't just about earning a paycheck. It's about stewardship, diligence, and faithfulness. It's about using the gifts God has given us to serve others and glorify Him. And it's about leading our families with courage, commitment, and love. That night at the kitchen table was a turning point for me. It wasn't the end of my struggles, but it was the beginning of a new chapter, one marked by diligence, responsibility, and a renewed commitment to living out God's purpose for my life. The call to diligence. Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. Proverbs 12:24. There is a divine call placed on each of us to work with diligence. It's not merely about earning a living or meeting expectations. It's about reflecting the character of God in the way we approach our responsibilities. Diligence is more than a work ethic. It's a spiritual posture that reveals our commitment to glorifying God in every area of our lives. When we open the Bible, we see the importance of diligence woven throughout Scripture. From the very beginning, God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden to work and care for it. See Genesis 2:15. Work was not a punishment or a consequence of sin. It was a divine assignment given before the fall. This tells us that work is a fundamental part of who we are as God's image bearers. The way we engage with our work, whether it's at home, in an office, or in ministry, reveals our understanding of this divine purpose. The importance of diligence. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Ecclesiastes 9:10. Diligence is about more than effort. It's about intentionality, consistency, and perseverance. It's easy to be motivated at the beginning of a task or when everything is going well, but diligence is revealed in how we respond when the work becomes difficult, mundane, or unrewarding. Proverbs 12:24 reminds us that diligent hands will rule. This verse underscores a timeless truth. Diligence leads to influence, growth, and provision. It's the diligent person who earns trust, demonstrates reliability, and positions themselves for leadership. On the other hand, laziness leads to frustration, dependency, and a lack of fulfillment. I didn't understand this fully until my wife confronted me that night. My lack of diligence had put us in a precarious position, thus not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. I had been avoiding the hard work of providing for my family, thinking I could put it off until I felt motivated. But that conversation was a wake-up call, reminding me that diligence isn't about waiting for the right feelings. It's about choosing to honor God through effort and faithfulness. The spiritual significance of diligence. Diligence is a reflection of God's character. When we work with diligence, we mirror the attributes of our Creator, who worked with care and intentionality when He formed the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1. The psalmist declares, "The works of His hands are faithful and just. All His precepts are trustworthy." Psalm 111:7. God's example challenges us to approach our own work with the same faithfulness and integrity. When I think back to the season of my life when I struggled with laziness, I realized that my lack of diligence wasn't just about my actions. It was about my heart. I had become disconnected from the purpose and meaning of work, viewing it as a burden rather than an opportunity to serve God and others. I allowed discouragement to paralyze me, forgetting that diligence is an act of worship. Colossians 3:23-24 reframes the way we should approach work. "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward." It is the Lord Christ you are serving. When we understand that our work is ultimately for God, it transforms how we approach even the most mundane tasks. Lessons from the Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is filled with wisdom about the value of diligence and the dangers of laziness. Proverbs 10:4 states, "Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth." This verse isn't merely about material wealth, it's about the richness that comes from living with purpose, discipline, and faithfulness. Another proverb that has always stood out to me is Proverbs 6:6-8. "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." The ant, a seemingly insignificant creature, demonstrates diligence by preparing for the future without needing constant supervision or encouragement. Its example is a rebuke to those who neglect their responsibilities, and it challenges us to embrace self-discipline and foresight in our own lives. When I reflect on that challenging season of my life, I realize how far I had drifted from this wisdom. Instead of preparing for the future or working proactively, I had allowed myself to become passive and dependent, waiting for circumstances to improve on their own. My wife's words that night were a reminder that I was called to something greater. A life of diligence rooted in trust and obedience to God. Diligence as a response to grace. One of the most powerful motivators for diligence is the recognition of God's grace in our lives. We don't work to earn His love or approval. We work because we've already received it. Ephesians 2:10 reminds us, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do." This verse reframes work as a response to God's goodness. It reminds us that diligence is not about striving in our own strength, but about participating in the good works He has prepared for us. When I recommitted myself to diligent work after that pivotal conversation with my wife, I began to see my efforts not as drudgery, but as a way to glorify God and express my gratitude for His faithfulness. I realized that diligence wasn't just about meeting my family's needs. It was about reflecting the character of Christ in everything I did. Overcoming the barriers to diligence. The way of the sluggard is blocked with thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. Proverbs 15:19. Laziness doesn't always look like doing nothing. Sometimes it looks like procrastination, distraction, or a lack of focus. In my case, it was an unwillingness to face rejection and failure, which led me to avoid the work of searching for a job or taking on new challenges. But Proverbs 15:19 reminds us that laziness creates unnecessary obstacles, turning even simple tasks into insurmountable barriers. Breaking free from laziness requires a shift in mindset. It requires acknowledging the lies we tell ourselves. I'll do it later. It doesn't really matter, or it's too hard, and replacing them with God's truth. Philippians 4:13 reminds us, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. When we rely on God's strength instead of our own, we find the courage and motivation to persevere. That's what I experienced during my journey toward diligence. When I stopped focusing on my limitations and started trusting in God's provision, I found new energy and determination. I began to see every job application, every rejection, and every small step forward as part of his plan to shape me into the man he wanted me to be. The ripple effect of diligence. Diligence doesn't just impact our work, it impacts every area of our lives. When we embrace a diligent mindset, we become better husbands, fathers, and servants of Christ. We model faithfulness and perseverance for our families, showing them what it looks like to trust God in both success and struggle. For me, one of the most humbling moments came when eldest began to notice the difference in me. She may not have understood all the details of my struggles, but she could see the shift in my attitude. She watched as I woke up earlier, worked harder, and approached each day with renewed purpose. And in her own way, she started to reflect that same diligence, putting more effort into her schoolwork, being more responsible with her chores, and even approaching challenges with a more determined spirit. My transformation was impacting her, and that realization motivated me even more. Proverbs 27 says, "The righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them." Our diligence isn't just for us. It's an inheritance we pass on to the next generation, a testimony of transformation. Looking back on that season, I'm grateful for the lessons God taught me through my struggles. He used my wife's honesty and his word to convict me, challenge me, and ultimately transform me. What felt like a painful confrontation at the time turned out to be a turning point, a moment when I chose to step into the calling of diligence and embrace the work God had placed before me. Diligence is a journey, not a destination. There are still days when I feel tired, discouraged, or unmotivated. But when those moments come, I return to the truth of Proverbs 12:24. Diligent hands will rule. I remind myself that diligence is not about perfection, it's about faithfulness. And I trust that as I continue to walk in obedience, God will provide the strength, wisdom, and grace I need to fulfill his purpose for my life. Working as unto the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Colossians 3:23-24. Work is a reality for every human being. Whether we're working a 9-to-5 job, managing a household, or serving in ministry, work often consumes much of our time and energy. Yet, how often do we pause to consider why we work and for whom we are ultimately working? The truth is, the purpose behind our work is as important as the effort we put into it. Colossians 3:23-24 provides a perspective-altering truth. We are called to work not for human recognition, rewards, or approval, but for the glory of God. This mindset transforms the way we approach our jobs, our responsibilities, and even the challenges we face in the workplace. When we understand that we are working for the Lord, every task, no matter how small, takes on eternal significance. Work as a form of worship. The Bible is clear that our work is not separate from our faith. It is an expression of it. From the very beginning, God designed work to be a meaningful part of our lives. Genesis 2:15 tells us that God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. This shows us that work is not a punishment or a result of the fall. It's a divine assignment. When we approach work with the understanding that it is ultimately for God, we begin to see it as a form of worship. Worship isn't confined to Sunday mornings or church activities. It extends to the way we carry out our responsibilities, interact with others, and steward the opportunities God has given us. This truth became real to me during one of the most challenging seasons of my life. After my wife confronted me about my laziness, I knew I needed to make a change. But as I began applying for jobs and working on projects, I struggled with feelings of inadequacy and frustration. I found myself asking, why am I doing this? It wasn't until I meditated on Colossians 3:23-24 that I realized I needed to shift my focus. I had been working to meet expectations, to earn approval, or to avoid failure. But those motivations were fragile and fleeting. When I began to see my work as an offering to God, everything changed. My attitude shifted from obligation to gratitude, and I found new purpose in tasks that had once seemed mundane. The freedom of working for God. Working for human recognition often leads to exhaustion and discouragement. No matter how hard we try, we can't please everyone, and the approval of others is temporary at best. But when we work for the Lord, we experience freedom. Freedom from the pressure to prove ourselves and freedom from the fear of failure. Paul's words in Colossians remind us that our ultimate reward comes from God, not from people. This doesn't mean we should neglect our earthly responsibilities or disregard the authority of our employers. Rather, it means that our motivation should come from a desire to honor God, regardless of whether others notice or acknowledge our efforts. During that season, I experienced this freedom firsthand. I stopped worrying about whether my resume would impress potential employers or whether I was meeting someone else's expectations. Instead, I focused on doing my best in each task, trusting that God saw my efforts and would provide in His time. Integrity in the workplace. When we work as unto the Lord, we are called to uphold a standard of integrity that reflects His character. Proverbs 10:9 says, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." Integrity means doing the right thing even when no one is watching. It means being honest, reliable, and trustworthy in all aspects of our work. For me, this was a humbling lesson. In the past, I had cut corners, justified half-hearted efforts, and made excuses for my lack of commitment. But as I began to see my work as an act of worship, I realized that integrity wasn't optional. It was essential. One memory stands out vividly. I had taken on a temporary job while searching for a more permanent position. The work wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't in line with my long-term goals. It would have been easy to give the bare minimum effort, especially since I didn't see the job as part of my future. But Colossians 3:23 challenged me to approach each task with excellence, as if I were serving Christ Himself. I remember one afternoon, knee-deep in the muck of a horse stall, shoveling manure, a job no one was supervising and one that no one would likely notice. As I worked, I prayed, asking God to help me do it with a joyful heart. It wasn't about the manure, it was about honoring Him in the small things. That experience taught me that integrity isn't just about what we do when others are watching. It's about who we are when no one else is around. Trusting God with the outcome. One of the hardest parts of working as unto the Lord is releasing control over the outcome. When we're striving for promotions, recognition, or financial stability, it's tempting to measure our worth by external results. But Colossians 3:24 reminds us that our inheritance comes from the Lord, not from human achievement. Trusting God with the outcome doesn't mean we stop working hard or setting goals. It means we surrender the results to Him, knowing that His plans are greater than ours. Proverbs 16:3 says, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans." This truth carried me through many moments of uncertainty. There were times when I felt overlooked, underappreciated, or frustrated by setbacks. But as I kept my focus on serving God, I experienced a peace that went beyond my circumstances. I knew that my work had eternal value, even if it didn't always yield immediate rewards. The impact of a Christ-centered work ethic. When we work as unto the Lord, our attitude and actions become a testimony to those around us. Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, "Let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Our work ethic can reflect God's character to our coworkers, clients, and employers. Whether we realize it or not, people are watching how we handle challenges, how we treat others, and how we approach our responsibilities. When we work with integrity, humility, and excellence, we point others to Christ. I remember a conversation with a coworker during that same temporary job. He asked me why I seemed so focused and positive, even when the tasks were tedious. I shared with him the perspective I had gained from Colossians 3:23-24, that I was working for the Lord, not just for a paycheck. That conversation opened the door to share my faith, and it reminded me that our work is a platform for ministry. Working for eternal rewards. Ultimately, working as unto the Lord reminds us that our efforts are part of a bigger story. The rewards we receive on earth, paychecks, promotions, or recognition, are temporary, but the inheritance we receive from God is eternal. 1 Corinthians 15:58 encourages us with these words, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." This verse reminds us that every act of faithfulness, no matter how small, is seen and valued by God. It challenges us to keep going, even when the work feels thankless or overwhelming, knowing that our ultimate reward comes from Him. A changed perspective. As I reflect on that season of my life, I'm grateful for how God used Colossians 3:23-24 to reshape my understanding of work. I learned that my efforts weren't just about meeting my family's needs or achieving personal goals. They were about honoring the one who called me to work in the first place. Working as unto the Lord doesn't mean we won't face challenges, frustrations, or setbacks, but it does mean that we have a higher purpose and a deeper motivation. It means that every task, no matter how ordinary, becomes an opportunity to glorify God and serve Him with all our hearts. Responsibility in the workplace. Now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. 1 Corinthians 4:2. Responsibility is a cornerstone of biblical living, and nowhere is this more evident than in the workplace. When we think about the responsibilities entrusted to us, whether as employees, employers, or entrepreneurs, it's clear that our actions in the workplace reflect our integrity and character. Responsibility isn't just about meeting deadlines or fulfilling job descriptions. It's about embodying trustworthiness and dependability in a way that honors God and serves others. In 1 Corinthians 4:2, Paul speaks to the requirement of faithfulness for those who have been given a trust. Though this verse specifically refers to stewardship and ministry, its principle applies to every area of our lives. When God entrusts us with a job, a project, or a team, He calls us to steward those responsibilities with excellence and faithfulness. Responsibility reflects God's character. God Himself is the ultimate model of responsibility and faithfulness. Throughout Scripture, we see His unwavering commitment to His promises. Deuteronomy 7:9 declares, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping His covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love Him and keep His commandments." When we embrace responsibility in the workplace, we mirror God's faithfulness to the people around us. Our dependability becomes a testimony to His character, showing others what it means to live with integrity and purpose. For me, this was a lesson I learned the hard way. During the season when I was struggling with laziness and a lack of direction, my failure to take responsibility created ripple effects in every area of my life. I wasn't just letting myself down. I was letting down my wife, my children, and ultimately, God. I remember a particular moment when my wife, overwhelmed by the weight of carrying our family's financial and emotional burdens, told me, "I need to know I can depend on you." Her words weren't accusatory. They were a heartfelt cry for partnership and accountability. That conversation forced me to confront the reality of my irresponsibility and to recognize how deeply it was impacting those I loved. The call to dependability. Dependability is one of the most tangible ways we demonstrate responsibility in the workplace. When we are dependable, we build trust with our coworkers, supervisors, and clients. Proverbs 26 highlights the value of dependability. Many claim to have unfailing love, but a faithful person who can find? Faithfulness in the workplace means showing up on time, following through on commitments, and giving our best effort, even when the task feels thankless or unnoticed. It's about being the kind of person others can rely on, knowing that we will do what we say we will do. I'll never forget the first job I took after deciding to recommit myself to responsibility. It wasn't a glamorous position, and it certainly didn't align with my career aspirations. But I approached it with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to be dependable in every aspect of my work. One day, my supervisor pulled me aside and said, "I've noticed how reliable you've been. You're always on time, you take initiative, and you don't cut corners." That kind of attitude is rare. His words reminded me that dependability doesn't go unnoticed. Even if no one else sees our efforts, God does, and He honors our faithfulness. Taking ownership of our responsibilities. One of the hallmarks of responsibility is taking ownership of our roles and tasks. This means refusing to shift blame, make excuses, or avoid accountability. Galatians 6:5 reminds us, "For each one should carry their own load." Taking ownership requires humility and self-awareness. It means acknowledging our mistakes, learning from them, and striving to improve. For me, this was a significant shift. In the past, I had been quick to blame circumstances or other people for my failures. I justified my lack of effort by focusing on external challenges rather than taking responsibility for my actions. But as I meditated on scriptures like 1 Corinthians 4:2 and Galatians 6:5, I began to see my work as an opportunity to glorify God through stewardship. Instead of viewing my responsibilities as burdens, I began to see them as blessings, opportunities to grow, serve, and contribute to something greater than myself. The ripple effect of responsibility. Responsibility doesn't just impact our immediate tasks, it creates a ripple effect that influences those around us. When we embrace responsibility, we inspire trust, foster collaboration, and contribute to a culture of excellence. As a husband and father, I have seen how my commitment to responsibility in the workplace has positively impacted my family. My children watch how I handle challenges, how I persevere through difficulties, and how I honor my commitments. They learn the value of hard work and integrity not just from what I say, but from what I do. Proverbs 22:1 underscores the importance of this legacy. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Responsibility builds a good name, not for our own glory, but as a reflection of God's work in our lives. Balancing responsibility with rest. While responsibility is essential, it's important to balance it with rest. Even God, after creating the heavens and the earth, rested on the seventh day, Genesis 2:2-3. Responsibility doesn't mean working ourselves to the point of burnout. It means stewarding our time, energy, and resources wisely. For me, learning to balance responsibility with rest has been an ongoing journey. There have been seasons when I've overcompensated for past failures by taking on too much, only to find myself exhausted and ineffective. But as I've grown in my understanding of God's design for work and rest, I've learned to set healthy boundaries and prioritize what truly matters. Jesus himself modeled this balance during his ministry. In Mark 6:31, he told his disciples, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." This verse reminds us that rest is not a sign of weakness. It's a necessary part of living responsibly and sustainably. Responsibility is a reflection of faith. At its core, responsibility in the workplace is a reflection of our faith. When we are faithful in the small things, we demonstrate our trust in God's provision and our commitment to his purposes. Luke 16:10 says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." As I look back on my journey, I'm grateful for the lessons God has taught me about responsibility. It hasn't always been easy, but it has been worth it. Each step of faithfulness, each moment of dependability, has drawn me closer to Him and allowed me to reflect His character in my work. Whether you're managing a team, working behind the scenes, or pursuing a personal passion, remember that your responsibility is a gift from God. Embrace it with gratitude, steward it with excellence, and trust that He will use your efforts for His glory and your good. Serving others through work. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Galatians 5:13. Work, at its essence, is an opportunity to serve others. While the world often views work as a means to personal gain, whether financial security, professional advancement, or recognition, the Bible paints a far more profound picture. Work is a way to demonstrate love, humility, and service to those around us, reflecting the heart of Christ in every task we undertake. Work is a ministry of service. When Paul wrote to the Galatians, he reminded them of their freedom in Christ. This freedom, however, was not meant to be used selfishly, but as a way to serve others. This principle extends to the workplace, where our daily responsibilities often bring us into contact with coworkers, clients, and communities. Through our work, we can meet the needs of others, solve problems, and contribute to the well-being of society. Whether we're teaching children, caring for patients, building homes, or managing a business, our work has the potential to make a meaningful impact. When approached with the mindset of service, even seemingly mundane tasks take on eternal significance. This perspective didn't always come naturally to me. During the season when I struggled with motivation and responsibility, I saw work as something I had to do rather than an opportunity to serve. My focus was on what I could gain, whether it was a paycheck or personal satisfaction, rather than on how I could bless others. It wasn't until I began meditating on scriptures like Galatians 5:13 that my understanding of work began to shift. I realized that God had placed me in my role, not just for my benefit, but to serve those around me. Jesus, the ultimate example of service. The ultimate example of serving others through work is found in the life of Jesus. Throughout his ministry, Jesus consistently put the needs of others above his own. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, taught the lost, and washed the feet of his disciples. In doing so, he demonstrated that no act of service is too small or insignificant. In John 13:14-15, Jesus says, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." This act of humility, performed on the eve of his crucifixion, underscores the importance of serving others in practical ways. When we adopt this mindset, our work becomes more than a job. It becomes a ministry. We may not be washing feet in a literal sense, but every time we go the extra mile for a colleague, handle a customer's complaint with patience, or mentor a struggling employee, we reflect Christ's servant-hearted love. The power of humble service. Serving others through work requires humility. Philippians 2:3-4 challenges us, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others." This kind of humility doesn't come naturally, especially in a culture that often prioritizes individual success over collective well-being. But when we choose to prioritize the needs of others, we create an environment of trust, collaboration, and mutual respect. One of the most powerful lessons I learned about humble service came during a particularly difficult work project. I was tasked with leading a team that included a coworker who frequently clashed with me. Our personalities and work styles couldn't have been more different, and I often found myself frustrated by her approach. But as I prayed for wisdom, God reminded me of the principle in Galatians 5:13. Instead of focusing on my own frustrations, I began looking for ways to serve this coworker. I started by asking how I could support him. listening to his concerns, and finding common ground. Over time, our working relationship improved and the project was completed successfully. That experience taught me that serving others isn't about being passive or avoiding conflict. It's about choosing to see others through God's eyes and putting their needs above my own. Serving others brings glory to God. When we serve others through work, we glorify God. Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." This truth reminds us that our actions in the workplace, whether big or small, have the potential to point others to Christ. The way we treat our coworkers, handle challenges, and approach our responsibilities speaks volumes about our faith. During one of my jobs, I had a supervisor who rarely expressed gratitude or encouragement. It would have been easy to grow resentful or to match his indifference with my own lack of effort. But I kept coming back to Galatians 5:13 and Matthew 5:16. I realized that my attitude and actions could be a witness, even if they went unacknowledged. So I made a conscious decision to serve joyfully, to show kindness even when it wasn't reciprocated, and to approach my tasks with excellence. While I didn't always see immediate results, I knew that my ultimate goal was to honor God and trust Him with the impact. Practical ways to serve through work. Serving others through work doesn't always require grand gestures. Often, it's the small, consistent acts of kindness and diligence that make the biggest difference. Here are a few practical ways to serve others in the workplace. Offer encouragement. A kind word or a note of appreciation can go a long way in lifting someone's spirits. Be a problem solver. Instead of focusing on obstacles, look for ways to create solutions that benefit others. Practice active listening. Take the time to truly hear what your coworkers or clients are saying and respond with empathy and understanding. Go the extra mile. Whether it's staying late to help a colleague or volunteering for a challenging task, showing initiative demonstrates a heart of service. Pray for your workplace. Ask God to give you opportunities to serve and to use your work as a platform for His glory. Finding joy in serving. One of the beautiful byproducts of serving others through work is the joy it brings. Acts 20:35 reminds us, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." When we shift our focus from ourselves to others, we experience the fulfillment that comes from making a difference. For me, this joy became evident as I began to see my work not as a means to an end, but as a ministry. Each interaction, each task became an opportunity to bless someone else. This shift in perspective transformed my attitude and deepened my sense of purpose. Galatians 5:13 calls us to serve one another humbly in love, and the workplace is one of the most tangible arenas where we can live out this calling. When we approach work with a heart of service, we reflect Christ's love, build meaningful relationships, and contribute to the flourishing of others. The pursuit of excellence. Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank. Proverbs 22:29. The pursuit of excellence is more than a call to do our best. It's a call to reflect the glory of God in everything we do. Excellence is not about perfection or competition. It's about faithfully stewarding the gifts, talents, and opportunities God has given us. When we strive for excellence, we honor God, inspire others, and demonstrate the transformative power of His work in our lives. Excellence as a reflection of God's character. God is a God of excellence. From the intricacies of creation to the precision of His plans, His work reflects beauty, order, and intentionality. Psalm 19:1 declares, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands." When we pursue excellence in our work, we mirror this aspect of His character, offering our labor as an act of worship. For me, this lesson came during a season of rebuilding my work ethic. After losing several jobs and grappling with a lack of motivation, I realized that my previous approach to work had been marked by complacency. I had been content with good enough, thinking that as long as I met the bare minimum requirements, I was fulfilling my responsibilities. But Proverbs 22:29 challenged me to rethink this mindset. The verse highlights the connection between skill, excellence, and opportunity. It reminded me that excellence opens doors, not for personal glory, but for greater impact and influence in the world. The biblical call to excellence. Excellence isn't a concept reserved for high achievers or extraordinary talents. It's a biblical standard for all believers, rooted in the principle of stewardship. Colossians 3:23-24 encourages us, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." This passage reminds us that excellence is not about earning approval from others. It's about serving God with our whole heart. When we strive for excellence, we align ourselves with God's purpose for our lives. We recognize that our work, whether it's building, teaching, creating, or caring, is a platform for His glory. The heart behind excellence. Excellence begins in the heart. It's not about outward appearances or accolades. It's about the motivation behind our efforts. Philippians 2:3-4 reminds us, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others." This verse challenges us to pursue excellence not for personal gain, but as a way to serve others and reflect Christ's love. When our work is fueled by humility, gratitude, and a desire to honor God, it becomes a powerful testimony to those around us. Striving for excellence in everyday tasks. Excellence isn't limited to big projects or high-profile roles. It's revealed in the small, everyday tasks that often go unnoticed. Luke 16:10 teaches, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." This verse reminds us that faithfulness in the small things prepares us for greater opportunities. During my journey toward a renewed work ethic, I found myself in a position that, on the surface, seemed insignificant. It wasn't a role I would have chosen, and it certainly didn't align with my career aspirations. But as I meditated on Proverbs 22:29, I realized that excellence wasn't about the prestige of the work. It was about the attitude I brought to it. One afternoon, I was tasked with organizing supplies in a back room. It was tedious, repetitive work, and no one would have noticed if I had cut corners. But as I prayed for a heart of diligence, I approached the task with care and intentionality, treating it as an offering to God. That experience taught me that excellence isn't about the size of the task. It's about the spirit in which it's done. The impact of excellence. Excellence has a ripple effect. When we approach our work with skill, care, and intentionality, we inspire those around us and contribute to a culture of integrity and collaboration. Our pursuit of excellence becomes a testimony to the transformative power of God's grace, showing others what it means to live a life of purpose and faithfulness. Proverbs 22:29 speaks of those who are skilled in their work serving before kings. This imagery reminds us that excellence creates opportunities for influence and impact. Whether we're leading a team, mentoring a colleague, or simply doing our job with integrity, our commitment to excellence reflects the kingdom values of stewardship, humility, and service. Excellence in the face of challenges. Pursuing excellence isn't always easy. There are times when the work feels overwhelming, the results seem insignificant, or the challenges appear insurmountable. In these moments, it's tempting to settle for mediocrity or give up altogether. But 2 Corinthians 12:9 reminds us of an important truth. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." When we rely on God's strength rather than our own, we find the courage to persevere, even in the face of adversity. One of the most challenging moments for me came when I faced repeated rejections during a job search. Each rejection felt like a blow to my confidence, and I began to question whether my efforts were worth it. But as I leaned into God's grace and meditated on His promises, I realized that my pursuit of excellence wasn't about immediate results. It was about faithfulness, a legacy of excellence. Excellence leaves a lasting legacy. When we approach our work with integrity, skill, and care, we not only glorify God, but also inspire others to do the same. Our commitment to excellence becomes a gift to future generations, setting an example of what it means to live with purpose and passion. Proverbs 13:22 says, "A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children." While this verse often refers to material blessings, it also speaks to the spiritual and relational legacy we leave behind. Our pursuit of excellence shapes the values and character of those who come after us, equipping them to live lives of impact and faithfulness. Striving for God's glory. As I reflect on my journey, I'm reminded that the pursuit of excellence is not about perfection. It's about giving our best for God's glory. Whether we're tackling a complex project, managing daily responsibilities, or encouraging a teammate, every effort becomes an opportunity to reflect His character and point others to Him. Proverbs 22:29 challenges us to approach our work with skill and dedication, knowing that excellence honors God and positions us for greater influence. As we strive for excellence, let us remember that our efforts are not in vain. Each act of faithfulness, no matter how small, is a seed planted for His kingdom. Finding joy in labor. That each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Ecclesiastes 3:13. Finding joy in labor may seem like a foreign concept, especially in a world where work is often viewed as a necessary burden rather than a blessing. But Scripture tells a different story. Work, when approached with the right perspective, is a gift from God, a source of purpose, fulfillment, and even joy. Ecclesiastes 3:13 reminds us that satisfaction in our work is a divine blessing, not something we create through ambition or external success. This perspective challenges us to shift our focus from what we gain from work to how we glorify God through it. When we embrace this truth, we can find joy in even the most routine or challenging tasks. Work as a gift. The Bible paints a beautiful picture of work as a God-given gift. From the very beginning, God designed work to be a meaningful part of our lives. In Genesis 2:15, we see that Adam was placed in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. This shows us that work is not a result of the fall, it's a reflection of God's creativity and purpose. When we view work as a gift rather than a burden, our perspective begins to change. Instead of approaching our tasks with dread or apathy, we see them as opportunities to partner with God, steward His creation, and serve others. This mindset doesn't ignore the difficulties of work, but it reframes them in light of God's greater purpose. For me, this lesson came during a season when I was struggling to find joy in my labor. I had taken a job that on the surface felt uninspiring and far removed from my long-term goals. But as I meditated on Ecclesiastes 3:13, I began to see that joy wasn't about the nature of the work. It was about the posture of my heart. The source of joy in work, true joy in work, comes not from the tasks themselves, but from the one we serve through those tasks. Colossians 3:23-24 reminds us, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." When we focus on glorifying God rather than seeking human approval, we find a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment. This perspective frees us from the need to compare ourselves to others or to measure our worth by worldly standards. Instead, we find joy in knowing that our labor, no matter how small, is valuable in God's eyes. I experienced this shift firsthand when I decided to approach my work as an offering to God. Whether I was cleaning, organizing, or solving problems, I chose to do it with gratitude and excellence, trusting that my efforts mattered to Him. This change in perspective didn't eliminate the challenges of work, but it infused my days with a renewed sense of joy and purpose. Overcoming obstacles to joy. Finding joy in labor isn't always easy. There are seasons when work feels overwhelming, monotonous, or thankless. In these moments, it's tempting to focus on the negatives and lose sight of the bigger picture. The writer of Ecclesiastes acknowledges this tension. describing the fleeting nature of human toil and the frustration of earthly pursuits, Ecclesiastes 1:3. Yet in Ecclesiastes 3:13, he points us to the source of true joy, recognizing work as a gift from God. Here are some common obstacles to joy in labor and how we can overcome them. Burnout. When work feels relentless, it's easy to lose joy. To combat burnout, we must prioritize rest and rely on God's strength. Matthew 11:28-30 offers a comforting invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Comparison. Comparing ourselves to others can rob us of joy. Galatians 6:4 encourages us to focus on our own work. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. Lack of purpose. When work feels meaningless, it's important to remember that every task has eternal value when done for God's glory. 1 Corinthians 15:58 reminds us, always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Practical steps to finding joy in labor. Start with gratitude. Joy begins with a grateful heart. Take time to thank God for the opportunity to work, for the skills He has given you, and for the provision that comes through your labor. Gratitude shifts our focus from what we lack to what we've been blessed with, fostering contentment and joy. Each morning, list 3 things you're thankful for related to your work. This practice can help you approach your task with a positive attitude. Pray for perspective. Ask God to help you see your work through His eyes. Pray for wisdom to understand how your efforts contribute to His kingdom, and for strength to persevere through challenges. Begin your workday with a prayer asking God to guide your thoughts, words, and actions. Invite Him into every aspect of your labor. Find meaning in small tasks. Even the most mundane tasks can have meaning when done for God's glory. Approach each task with care and excellence, knowing that your work reflects His character. Identify one routine task that you often overlook and commit to doing it with intentionality and care this week. Serve others through your work. One of the greatest sources of joy is knowing that your work benefits others. Whether you're helping a colleague, serving a customer, or creating something that impacts your community, your efforts have the power to make a difference. Look for one way to serve someone through your work today, whether it's offering encouragement, going the extra mile, or meeting a specific need. Celebrate progress, not perfection. Joy isn't found in achieving perfection, but in recognizing growth and progress. Celebrate the small victories and milestones along the way, and trust that God is working through your efforts. At the end of each day, reflect on one accomplishment or moment of growth, and thank God for His guidance and provision. The eternal perspective. Ecclesiastes 3:13 reminds us that satisfaction in work is a gift from God. But this satisfaction is not limited to earthly rewards. It points us to the eternal hope we have in Christ. Revelation 22:3-5 gives us a glimpse of the future, where we will serve God in perfect joy and fulfillment. His servants will serve Him. They will see His face, and His name will be on their foreheads. This eternal perspective reminds us that our labor on earth is not in vain. Every act of faithfulness, every moment of diligence, and every effort to glorify God through our work contributes to His kingdom. Finding joy in labor is not about changing our circumstances. It's about changing our perspective. When we see work as a gift from God and an opportunity to serve Him, we discover a joy that transcends challenges and circumstances. Ecclesiastes 3:13 calls us to embrace this gift with gratitude, purpose, and faithfulness. As we work with all our hearts, trusting in God's provision and guidance, we find a joy that reflects His goodness and points others to Him. Let us approach each day with a renewed commitment to finding joy in labor, knowing that our efforts, no matter how small, are part of His greater plan.